Full circle, 360, as they say. Elections 2024, done and dusted. Results are in, declared just a short while ago, free and fair. You've exercised the franchise. Some surprises, some we expected, right? Now, talk of the C word, coalitions.
Absolutely. But we knew this going in.
Yeah.
We knew this was going to be the outcome going in, and I don't know whether we anticipated that it would play out quite as wildly as it has, though.
We're going to break it down for you, get you some analysis, get you some perspective with regards to the latest numbers. More after this. All right, let's get you the latest with regards to the state of play in South Africa. Let's put up some of the graphics and show you the numbers. The national picture, Sakina, looks very interesting. The ANC's numbers slashed down to just over 40%, right? So in order for the ANC to stay in power, they need to share power with the rival. So these are the numbers currently as you see. The ANC sitting at 40%, the DA 22%. And there's the glaring change in the top three from 2019. The MK party comes in with 15%.
Indeed. And of course, how does this play out provincially? And you spoke of the C word, the coalitions. And as you can imagine, it must be frantic as everybody's calling everybody else. And I suppose some people waiting to be called, sitting by that phone, making sure it is fully charged. Well, let's take a look at the provincial picture. Let's break it down to you now per province to see exactly how this has played out. So we saw the top three, the EFF being replaced by Umkhonto weSizwe Party as the third largest party in the country. But this is the picture in the Eastern Cape. And this is one of the provinces where the ANC has held on, quite strongly. 62% of the vote going to the African National Congress. And then that was followed by the DA with 15% and the EFF 10% of the vote garnered in the Eastern Cape.
So it's slightly different than 2019. ANC getting a reduced majority. ANC had 68% in 2019, the DA had 15%, and the EFF had 7%. So you can see how these numbers are playing out. Let's move on now and give you the numbers for the Free State. I just want to remind you what the 2019 numbers were showing. Context always important. ANC had over 61%, the DA over 17%, and the EFF over 12%. This is how it's shaping up now. ANC 52%, DA 22%, and the EFF 14%. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is a very interesting one coming up now as we move on, going through the provinces. And don't dismay, we'll have some analysis where we'll take a closer look at all of these outcomes. So moving on to Gauteng, hotly contested. But this was expected. And of course, the anticipation of where everybody would land, that is the question. So let's look at the outcome. For Gauteng, 35% of the vote garnered here went to the African National Congress, and this is of course followed by 27% from the Democratic Alliance and the EFF coming in at 13%. And those numbers give you an indication of just how interesting the coalition talks are going to be, because whatever you do at national is going to have an impact on what happens at the provincial level. So it just complicates the matter slightly.
So a couple of questions there, right? The political parties will be asking themselves, firstly, do I even want to be in a coalition with you? The second one is, what are the preconditions? And the third one maybe is, what's the format? So interesting answers that should be coming from those questions. Let's look at another hotly contested province, KwaZulu-Natal. Now, we know that Jacob Zuma, this is Jacob Zuma's home province. Look at the numbers there. MK party sitting at 45%, the IFP coming in second, and the ANC third with 17%. So a bit of a reshuffle there in that hotly contested province.
And of course, the Umkhonto weSizwe party here, they have the option to decide which way they go. But as we've been saying, whatever happens, at the one end is going to have an impact at what happens at the other end.
And you know all too well about the focus in KwaZulu-Natal, right? All the manifestos of the big parties held there. How did it play out? Remember, the real test is always at the polls. Great for optics, but you see the results. Okay, let's move on to Mpumalanga. Let's put up Mpumalanga.
So here's Mpumalanga, and also another shift, very interesting. This was one of 3 provinces where the EFF were the official opposition. But as you can see, the ultimate result here brings the ANC in at just over 51%, 51.15%, followed by MK at your 17% and 14% for the EFF. So MK now basically being installed as the official opposition, surpassing the EFF in Mpumalanga.
Very interesting indeed. Let's put up another interesting province. Northern Cape is coming up. Now here, the ANC just missing out on the majority. So again, coalition talks. And you see the ANC sitting at 49%, the DA at 21%, and then the Malema's for Julius Malema's party, the EFF, coming in at 13%.
It's an interesting one because whilst the ANC has lost their majority, so they are forced to go into a coalition there, but they need 1%. And but what does this mean for the overall picture of who they choose to go into an alliance with? All right, and we go to Limpopo next. Let's see there. And as we said, like the Eastern Cape, this another stronghold for the ANC that they have managed to hold on to. 73% of the vote cast in Limpopo went to the ANC, and that was followed by the EFF on 14% and the DA coming in there in Limpopo at 6%.
Let's run through Northwest now, and I'll give you some numbers from 2019 so you'll have some context. ANC in 2019 was over 61%, EFF 18%, and DA over 11%. This is how it stacks up now, as you can see. The ANC 58%, the EFF coming in at 17%, and then the DA at 13%.
And moving on to the final one, the Western Cape. And the Western Cape, of course, the DA, they managed to hold on there, so garnering the outright majority at 55%, followed by the ANC, ANC getting 20% there, and then, of course, Gayton Mackenzie's PA, which is, of course, the new kid on the block there, and they came in there with 8% of the vote. So very interesting, but of course the DA, they would be happy that they managed to hold on there.
Yeah, similar results since 2019, but this time you have the PA coming in, kicking the EFF to 4th position. So very interesting dynamics indeed.
And I know they were quite, you know, they were not happy with that showing. They expected to do slightly better than they did in the Western Cape. But that's how it stacked up. But of course, people are also interested, Blaine, to know what this means for the race for seats in the National Assembly. 400 seats are there.
Right. Let's put it up. There you go. As you can see.
This is the National Assembly. These are the 400 seats that everybody was basically gunning for. And now we've got the final number of representation to see exactly. And I'll tell you, we had those seats, and since the announcement that just happened, we had to adjust it because there's one seat fewer for the African National Congress. It was 160, but with the final announcement, it is now 159 seats for the African National Congress. So this is equally interesting because some parties would have gained, some parties would have lost, and some parties would have disappeared from the scene.
Pretty close prediction. It was at 160. 159 is the final tally in terms of the seats. The DA getting 87 seats, the MK party 58 seats, and the EFF coming in with 39 seats. 400, 200 for the national list, 200 for the regional list. Calculations get a bit complicated. Too big for my small brain. Maybe Sakina will understand it better. But basically, it's a quota system, and each party is allocated on a proportional basis.
It is, and it takes various factors into consideration. And You know, it seems a little more complex than it actually is. But that's something that we need to make time for. Maybe our next guest, Terry Tselane, will quickly just simplify that for us so that we can look at exactly how that calculation works.
All right. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to bring them in, get you some analysis. More next.
And welcome back. Thanks for being with us here on Elections 360. It is our final show. We literally have come full circle, 360, so to speak. We started out here with the parties, all the announcements. First off, of course, by the IEC, all the milestones that needed to be met. And then we went on the campaign trail. We started with the election manifestos, and then we followed the parties around the country with our 360 debates. And then it was a whole week of bringing you coverage as to how it all played out at the polls. And now it is finally over. It has been declared, the results of elections 2024, the national election here in South Africa, and we're breaking down what all of that means for you. But before we get to our guests, we're now going to cross live to the SABC News politics editor on the latest following that declaration of the 2024 national and provincial election results. Good evening, Mzwai, and of course, it is now empty. They will start de-rigging soon, and then we start waiting and looking at, of course, what is happening in the next election. But talk to us about the latest there. What are you hearing? Because obviously people are going to start speaking to each other.
Oh yes, Sakina and Blaine, it is quite an interesting situation taking place here. In fact, it was very interesting to hear the president of the country also making very light of the moment, perhaps saying something about the maturity of our democracy. This party that he leads was the biggest casualty in terms of the losses. I mean, losing 17%, but everyone who is here embraced the fact that South Africans have spoken, and I think he did really speak about that voice needed to be respected. But as you and I know very well that South Africans spoke quite interestingly. In fact, one of the things that Sakina and Blaine that I've noticed is that they decided to increase the number of parties represented in parliament. Since 1994, we either have had 13 or 14 parties. Not this time around. We are 18, so quite interesting. But of course, you know that many of those parties either have 1 seat or 2 seats or 3 really at most, then outside of the big ones, which will go up then to 159, as you've been correctly and clearly articulating there in the studio. So what we know so far, particularly now about the issue at hand, remember this is done and dusted, the ceremonies are out of the way, Sakina. We are now looking into forming governments. Obviously there are certain processes towards that. So the ANC, which is a leading party in terms of the votes, does not have the majority to form the government on its own. So the official opposition earlier did indicate that it's willing to enter into talks. I think what I find interesting is that they keep on saying, so their willingness is to try and prevent what they call a doomsday coalition. So what that means, they mean an ANC that will go with EFF, and now in this instance with Umkhonto weSizwe. So clearly you can see that they have kind of like sent overtures to the governing party that, well, come to us, we are ready. And we do understand that the ANC as well, through its Secretary General, confirmed that it's speaking to everyone. It doesn't matter how they feel ideologically, but at this stage, South Africans have basically forced all of them to sit down and talk, because it's no longer about them, it's no longer about the parties they represent, but it's about the interests of the country. Because when all is said and done, Sakina, it is South Africa that must be served, and must be served by these people. So they have to talk, they have to find a common ground, and then they have to do it fast. With the declaration of results today, the timetable immediately kicks in. We have to conclude this process, because if this process can't be concluded, I guess you and I are not ready for another rerun.
So I tell you what, Mzwai, try being the operative word. Try and get as much sleep as you can over the next few days. Don't pay attention to who's saying what to whom. You try and get some rest, because it's going to start all over again. We're going to go to Parliament. We're going to have the inauguration. You're going to have another State of the Nation address, and that whole cycle that we are going to have to run through. But thank you so much, Mzwai Mbeche. And he's, of course, speaking to us there from the National Results Operations Center, which, of course, ceases to operate this evening. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll get into extrapolating a little more of what we can from these results, and of course peeling back those layers to let it make sense to all of us. Stay with us, please.
Welcome back. You're watching Elections 360, billed as a pivotal election. Election results now in, declared free and fair. Let's get to the analysis and insight from our guests. Let me introduce them to you. Our first guest tonight is Terry Tselane, the chairperson of the Institute of Election Management Services in Africa, as well as our very own Dr. Ronesh Dauraj, who is the head of the SABC News Research Department. Welcome to you all.
Thank you very much for having me.
Mr. Tselane, maybe we should start with you. And despite, well, the political parties being aggrieved, notwithstanding, the IEC was thrown with a raft of challenges. 3 ballots, independence, kicked up a whole lot of logistical issues. Having said that, what's your overall impression about how they handle things?
I think they've done a good job. The fact that we're sitting here today and the result has been declared, I think that on its own is commendable. There were challenges, of course, and hopefully going forward the Commission is going to deal with some of those challenges so that they do not recur. But all in all, I think the fact that we are able to celebrate this great achievement is testimony to the work that they actually put into these elections. But I think we must also commend the political parties and political leaders because, the environment conducive for free and fair elections is dependent on largely the political parties and leadership and then how they respond to that. And I think all of them have really shown so much maturity in terms of dealing with all these complexities and difficult issues. Even those who are disaggrieved by the process, they are following proper processes. They've lodged objections to the Commission, and then if they are not happy still with the way the Commission has responded, they still have other avenues, which is the Electoral Court. So all in all, the system is holding up, and I think it's a good thing for South Africa.
And I'm glad you mentioned that because there is still recourse, so that process is still ongoing. And maybe you could just give us the timelines during which that can happen.
Well, firstly, I mean, the Commission had to deal with Section 55 objections. And Section 55 objections, you deal with them within 48 hours. Of course, as you know, that they have extended that particular aspect in order to try to deal with the volume that they had of the objections, which is still within their timeframes. But the Commission also had about 7 days within which to declare the results, but they've been able to declare this in spite of the complexities of these elections within 4 days, which is also very commendable. As you've correctly pointed out now, there are issues now that can be dealt with by the Electoral Court, and that does not have any time frame. The Electoral Court can deal with any issue at any time when the issue is raised by a person or a political party.
Right. Doc, let me bring you in, known as the numbers guy in the SABC circles. With regard to the Section 55 objections, put into context for us, back 2019, over 50, I think it was.
56.
Compared to now.
Yeah, in previous elections, in 2019, the highest ever at that time was 56, and then before that, 2014, around 25. 5 years before that, 2009, it was around 20. So steadily it has been going up, and thankfully for the IEC as the elections body, obviously in this country, they have been managing that process, and they have been resolving those objections within that time frame enough and sufficient to actually declare the elections free and fair. This time around, we saw what happened last night, the IEC media briefing, lots of hype around it. We saw the entrance of the MK leader, Jacob Zuma, former ANC president, former president of the country. You know, I was at the entrance of the IEC Center, the Rock Center at Midrand, Gauteng, and very interestingly, I had my phone in my hand. And no one noticed the IEC CEO. He was right at the entrance where all the literature for the IEC and all that that setup is. And he was kind of observing very diligently, what's going on and how things are going to pan out. And I got that on video. So I think he was concerned as well, what's going to happen. And then soon after, Jacob Zuma made his grand entrance. He sat at the MK stand. Then they slowly whisked him off to the media center. They gave a media briefing there. A whole lot of other parties that have not won seats, that have very minimal amount of votes in these elections, they also joined that media briefing. And of course, we know what happened thereafter. Just over 500, not really objections, but complaints as well. And I think the IEC was confident enough with what they've done in terms of transparency, in terms of fairness, to actually hold today's event. I was very apprehensive. Sakina and I were talking whereas Telly earlier on, and we were talking about, I somehow expect a repetition of what happened at the ANC's 2022 December National Conference, where as the ANC president was on stage delivering his political report, I was somehow expecting Mr. Zuma making a grand entrance. I think a couple of years ago we saw, I think it was the 2016 or 2021 local government elections, Jacob Zuma was president then of the country, and we had a little mini protest on the side.
Civil society, or there was a group of people who went up, the Kwezi thing.
So I was somehow expecting something of that nature, but I think maybe the security was slightly tightened after what happened yesterday. So but I think the IEC is confident, like Terry has been saying as well. I think the IEC has done a fantastic job. Very lots of logistical nightmares to actually control, and obviously, like Blaine, you said earlier on, different kind of terrain as well. We had the Section 24A application process, which kicked into these elections. It's nothing new. It has been practiced in local government elections, a thing of 3 ballots as well. The only thing different this time around was that if you're in a metro, you get 3 ballots. If you're not in a metro, it's always been 3 ballots in municipal elections. So like the IEC was saying, these aren't new rules, just that amendments were made for national and provincial elections.
And of course, Terry, we look at it as 3 elections. That's what we'd like to think it is. But of course, we're actually looking at 19 elections taking place simultaneously.
Indeed. You've got about 9 provinces, and then all 9 provinces have got different permutations, because different political parties would be contesting those different provinces. So those are different elections. And then you've got now the new edition, which is the regional ballot. And the regional ballot also differs from region to region, and it's 9 regions. And then you've got the national ballot. So it is 9 regions times 2 with the provinces plus 1 national ballot, which would be different from all others, as we have seen in terms of the reflection of the results. So it's a little bit complex as a result of that.
If I can quickly ask, something that people were talking to, that formula for the calculation of seats, because this is one, and I saw the parties also grappling, trying to figure it out, because if they didn't like the result, they were trying to figure out, how do you calculate this thing?
So the seat calculation, you find it in Schedule 1 of the Electoral Act, Schedule 1A, rather. So what happens there is that and another people think that you can make a determination of the seats in advance, because they take the results of the last elections and say, if a party required so many votes to get a seat, you would actually be using you'd require the same number of votes in order to be able to get a seat. But that is not the case. So in terms of this formula, you take the total number of valid votes. So you've got to wait until the elections have actually been conducted, and then you can be able to see in terms of how many valid votes you have. Right. So once you've got the valid votes, you take that and you divide it according to the number of available seats plus 1, and then it gives, and then you ignore the fractions, so it will give you a quota. So once you've taken that quota, you use that quota for all the parties that have actually contesting that particular election. So if, for instance, it's at the national level, you will use the same quota to deal with the issue, with the number of seats that are actually available. If it's at the provincial level, again, you will do that, the valid votes in Gauteng, you divide that according to the number of seats available plus 1, and then whatever number it gives you, you ignore the fractions, and then you take that number, then you begin to use it to evaluate each and every number that the political party has received.
Right, we're going to talk more about that in a short while. We have to say goodbye to our SABC2 viewers. It's been a pleasure having them over the past, 8 weeks or so?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks so much for tuning in, because the numbers were, they were great. So thanks so much for lending us your ears and your eyes over the past 8 weeks.
The National Assembly must be constituted within 14 days now that the results have been declared. If that doesn't happen, what next? We'll discuss later.
SABC News has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are
Welcome back to our SABC News viewers. This is, of course, the final episode of Elections360. And I'm going to miss you, Blaine.
Yeah, me too.
Blaine has been my Sunday husband, my weekend husband for the past 8 weeks. And now,
it's been fun.
It has been fun. It's been a great deal of fun. But it's also been a great deal of important work. You know, making sure that the nation was up to speed with what the parties were thinking, what they were saying, what their policy positions were, and, you know, trying to make an informed decision at the polls.
And it all brought us to this day, right, when the results are declared free and fair. What does it mean in terms of going forward? Let's bring in Terry Tselane here, also Dr. Ronesh Daraj with us. Terry, so National Assembly must be constituted within 14 days now that the results have been announced and declared. Then, after that, the president must be elected within a space of, 30 days, right?
Yeah.
If that doesn't happen, remind the viewers what happens next.
So, as we've correctly pointed out, in terms of the legislation or the constitution, the National Assembly must be constituted within 14 days. And the president, in terms of the legislation, again, the constitution, must be elected within 30 days. And I'm not going to be talking about the modalities in terms of the schedule, in terms of how that particular process is going to go. I'm just going to be focusing on what the constitutional provision is. Because there are modalities that you've got to follow in terms of getting to that particular aspect. But essentially, if the president is not elected or the parties are not agreeable, say for instance, you've got now equal number of votes for each side, for one candidate. And then there is no one who is prepared to change, no matter how much you try to break the what do you call it?
The deadlock.
The deadlock. So and then 30 days passes, it means the president, the current president, will have to call for another election. And that election has got to take place within 90 days. And, you know, so whatever happens, the elections, if they've got to be repeated, they'll have to take place within 90 days.
And this, of course, is where the scenario planners come into their own. I somehow doubt that we would get to that stage. I am somehow hugely optimistic that this deal will be done quite quickly, where decisions will be made quite quickly as to who's going to go with whom and take it from there. But of course, Dr. Ronesh, just looking at the numbers, and I want to brag. You know, it's important to brag about your stuff.
Of course.
And our partnership with the CSIR, we called these results on Thursday morning.
Yeah.
And we said, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
I think at that point we were looking at 8%, you know, of the VDs declared.
Yeah.
We had it at 5%, and we said, the way it was, you know, panning out, we're like, okay, let's just wait. Let's just get a little bit more. At 8%, we went with it. And that's exactly how it stacked up.
Yeah, and we also predicted the turnout level. From day one, we said turnout will hover anything between 50 and 59%. And exactly that. It worked out around 58%. So I think the SABC was on the ball, on the button, all our teams at the Gauteng ROC. And, you know, obviously our partnership with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. Excellent team. We've had a working relationship with them. This is going to be the 20th year. We also plan on working with them in the 2026 local government elections. That's a solid, tight partnership. So I think they've come to the party. You know, you've seen the interviews, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it was our pop-up channel, SABC Live. These guys and the SABC go together. That was a marriage made in heaven. And we were spot on. And I was watching other media, especially on social media. They were quoting the SABC and CSIR. So how's that for brand? Brand perception, brand management, brand embellishment. So I think it's a very, very good relationship. And I think the SABC is just going to build on this. And especially around elections, Sakina and Blaine, I think what happens for the SABC as a public broadcaster is, fine, you've got your other media, you've got your other 2 major TV channels in this country, which is always good, you know, and then other radio stations, other private community media as well. But when it comes to elections, the authority is the SABC. Whether it's all our language radio stations, 19 radio stations, 4 or 5 TV channels, our pop-up channel, our digital platforms, it is the SABC. People will go to other media, but they will come back to the SABC to see what the SABC is saying about the elections, and that's the authority that we command around these times every 5 years or so.
With good reason. So, don't say we didn't tell you. 2026 local government elections are coming on. We haven't got it wrong for 20 years. We're not going to start now. The morning after, we will call that election. I remember some of the parties were saying, no, this can't be. You know, let's wait and see. And yesterday I saw some of them and I said, and then? And they're like, oh, you were right. I said, see, I could have spared you the pain of coming here and sitting out. We told you this. But it's been absolutely fabulous, you know, and our partners, you know, Professor Deba, Dr. Tringo, and everybody else, Dr. Sandile as well, everybody at the CSIR, you know, total shout out to you guys, absolute superstars with the rest of the team, and of course, everybody at SABC. Let's get to the numbers now.
You mentioned 2026, and I wonder in terms of the numbers that the independents have garnered, maybe 2026 is a better year for them rather than 2024 in terms of what you've seen, Terry. How did you think the independents fared out this time around?
Well, it was for the first time that the independents were participating in this process, and the process was always going to be a disadvantage for them. They do not have the infrastructure, they don't have the capacity like major political parties, but it was also a new system that was being tested. And as you know, that the minister now has appointed the panel that is going to be looking at the overhaul of the whole electoral system. So perhaps that particular system will be able to give a proper expression for participation of independents or those other South African who wants to participate as independents. But when it comes to local government election, it's slightly different in a sense that you will have a ward candidate. So your independents basically can only contest a clearly defined constituency, which is a ward. And then we've got lots of them really participating at that level. Some of them are able to make it, even though they are contesting against political parties, largely because they are contesting in a very small geographic area. So it is possible for them to be able to go door to door and then try to solicit for support and all that. So it is different. So we are able to see more of them participating and winning seats in local government elections than it has actually happened here in the national provincial elections. Regions are massive. I mean, to win a region, to get a seat in a region, such as Gauteng, for instance, it means you've got to be able to canvass for support for a bigger area. You require resources. And if you are not known, it's even worse, in terms of really getting support from the communities, because communities like going either for political parties that have got infrastructure or alternatively for personalities that are well known.
And it's expensive to get your message
It is
across,
very expensive. You require massive infrastructure to run a campaign. I mean, you've seen the new entrants of the political parties that they could not really compete with established political parties, largely because they don't have the experience, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the infrastructure to be able to run an election campaign.
And of course, the system doesn't favor them anyway.
Yeah, but the system, particularly this time around, did not really favor the independents.
So maybe let's look at the numbers and let's start with the seats, because I think all the other numbers we've been looking at, we've seen the predictions, but as they have now been declared, excuse me, the seats at national level for the National Assembly. Because I think, Dr. Ronesh, if we could run through those in terms of who got what, and the ANC at the end, we said 160, but we saw there in the declaration they ended on 159. So let's just look at those numbers.
Yeah, sure, Sakina. So obviously we know that in past elections since 1994 to 2019, we had a number of parties. In 2019, the most number of parties contesting elections, national, provincial, well, especially on the national ballot, 48, and we saw 14 parties actually making it to the National Assembly. This year was different. We had the highest number of parties, 52, and surprise, surprise, 18 parties made it to the National Assembly. Maybe some will see this as maturing democracy, South Africa taking a step in the right direction. So let's look at the numbers. In these elections, in the National Assembly, 7 new entrants, and very quickly, let's go through the 7 new entrants. Umkhonto we Sizwe Party, brand new party on the block, formed a couple of months ago, announced on 16 December last year, 58 seats in the National Assembly. The second new entrant, by the way, this is a party that has been around since 2013, formed by Gayton McKenzie, Kenny Kunene. Didn't do so well 2014, didn't do so well 2019, didn't do so well in the 2016 local government elections, 5 seats, but they really did a huge turnaround in 2021, the local government elections. 296,000 votes and a couple of mayors in a few places. In these elections, they did extremely well, around 325,000 votes they garnered for the national ballot, 9 seats in the National Assembly. So that's the second new entry. The third one, obviously, Herman Mashaba, the party leader, Action SA, very vocal, very middle-class party, very urban in all the metros. They entered the electoral space in 2021. The local government elections did fantastically in Gauteng's metros, Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, as well as Tshwane. They did extremely well in this election, 6 seats. That's the third new entrant. The fourth new entrant is, of course, the former leader of the DA, Democratic Alliance, the Build One South Africa, Mmusi Maimane. His party has 2 seats. And then the other one is, Sakina and I were talking about this, a very nice, small niche party called the National Coloured Congress. They got about 35,000 votes, surprised everybody. I think it's a party led by Fadil Adams.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is that party. I think the person who's number one on their list, her name is Sakina as well.
Oh,
yes.
okay, yeah.
Declare.
It's not me.
Yeah. So this party did very, very well. It was kind of flying under the radar until I kind of noticed while I was doing my background research into the numbers. So they ended up, very nicely with 2 seats. Then Rise Mzansi, I suppose it didn't rise that spectacularly in these elections, but they got around 65 to 67,000 votes. That translated loosely into 2 seats. Then the last new entrant, I'm not too sure what the acronym is spelled out fully, UAT. They ended up with a single seat. So while Sakina looks for that, let's give you a quick breakdown of the other one. Obviously, the ANC is losing 71 seats in the National Assembly. These elections, 159. The DA made a gain of 3 seats, 84 in the last election, 87 in these elections. Umkhonto we Sizwe, like we said, 58. EFF actually declined in these elections from 44 to 39. IFP did very well. They got an extra 29,000 votes in these elections. So on the ascent since 2019, then obviously 2024, 17 seats. We spoke about the Patriotic Alliance. Then obviously the other darling of the 2019 elections, the voters that migrated from the DA to the Freedom Front Plus. Freedom Front Plus did their best ever in 2019. They kind of gave up those gains. They gone back to 6. Those 4 seats pushed back to the DA probably, I'm saying. And then ACDP still kind of constant, 3 seats. UDM kind of hanging in there, 3 seats. ATM, very respectable, 2 seats. Al-Jamaa gained 1 more seat. It could be their stance on the Israel-Palestine issue that kind of pushed voters towards them. And then we've got Patricia de Lille's party actually lost 1 seat. And that's the seat of Brett Herron.
Brett Herron, yes.
I think he's the SG of the party. The SG of the party.
But he was the other member of parliament. For the Good Party.
Good
so
party.
The 1 seat. So that would be Patricia de Lille. She's 1. He's 2 on their list. That party, by the way, United Africans Transformation. So the person, the number 1 on their list is Lehlohonolo Wonderboy Mahlatsi will be going to party.
That name sounds familiar. Just one more. That's the PAC. Very nice niche party as well. Liberation credentials, very respectable 1 seat. Obviously, we had breakaways from the PAC before. PAM, Tema Godi's party, APC as well. Obviously, they didn't make it. They did contest. APC did contest. Tema Godi, former Scopa chairperson. Unfortunately, he tried again, but I think he got around 5,000 votes. So not sufficient enough. So very quickly, we spoke about the new entrants, but the ones that actually were kicked out, booted out of the National Assembly, African Independent Congress, the party that normally works with the ANC in a couple of the municipalities, I think Ekurhuleni and a few other places.
So they came to prominence during that demarcation issue in Matatiele some years ago.
And then the other one, Mosiwa Lakota, the irascible Lakota's party, has been booted out. I can't remember how many seats. I think it was 3 the last time or 2. And then the NFP, the late Zanele Kamakwaza's CB's party, National Freedom Party. I think, if I remember correctly, she had 1 or 2 seats. So they've been voted out. But the good news is that the NFP could probably play kingmaker in the KwaZulu-Natal legislature. They've just got 1 seat in that legislature.
So all these numbers boils down to the talk of coalitions and the unions and the marriages that might emanate. The need to weigh up the party's interests with which I assume would be the supreme interest, which is the nation. We need stability. Do you think, Terry, that we need a more concrete legal framework in order to manage these coalitions going forward?
Absolutely. We've been advocating for the regulation of coalitions so that you don't have the kind of the instability that we have experienced, particularly in the metropolitan areas where we've got coalitions. But before I actually talk about that, there is a story that is important about these elections. Because before we went into these elections, there were quite a number of people who were asking a question about what will happen when the ANC loses power. Will it accept the results of the elections or not? And I think it is a story that we must actually, when we talk about the maturity of the South African democratic system, that we must actually celebrate. The fact that the African National Congress has lost so much, but at the same time, They've never contested these elections. They've accepted them from the beginning. I remember when we were at the results center having discussions with Mr. Mantashe, even as the results were coming in, he said, we as the ANC are not going to contest these elections. We're going to be accepting them. Now, if major political parties like the ANC and the EFF, by the way, because as you've correctly pointed out, they also went down by about 1.2%. And again, the EFF leader, Julius Malema, who was also amongst the first to say, even though there were irregularities, there were all these problems, we are accepting the outcome of the results of this election. That is important when we talk about the maturity of the democratic system in South Africa, that major political parties were able to go down, but at the same time, we did not see any violence, we did not see any challenges of this story, and in fact, they've accepted, and you've seen now the president also basically conceding and accepting the results as they've actually been.
And that's not just a South African, important for South Africa, it's so important for the continent, you know, where you have a formal a liberation movement that is magnanimous in defeat and steps aside, because so often, you know, people will hold on to power for the longest time, even in undemocratic ways. So I think this will reverberate very well across. So yeah, good point, Terry. The ANC has been magnanimous in defeat.
Absolutely. You know, so that's a story that we must celebrate when we talk about the majority of the South African democratic system. Now, coming back to this issue of coalitions, and then you've indicated earlier on that there must be conversations amongst all the political parties at bilateral level and all different formations. There is the multi-party charter. They are also having discussions amongst themselves. But all of them, in terms of what they've been saying, they're prepared to work with each other. Even though before the elections, political parties were saying, I'm not going to be working with this one. Ideologically, we differ. They appear to have buried that.
I mean, see, they've been humbled by the numbers. The electorate has humbled everybody. The electorate has spoken.
But the tough part is going to be now making sure that when they have agreed, because we don't have a legal framework to basically regulate that relationship, that they actually keep to the terms, and then you don't end up with a situation where you have elected the president and the president goes to Davos, and then when it's Davos there, they told, by the way, you are no longer the president.
Deja vu.
Your security detail is required. There is a new president. So hopefully, you know, the political parties and political leaders who are going to be entering into this coalition, they will understand the significance of this moment and make sure that there is stability in our country, because that's what we need. We do not want to see all these changes. We need policy certainty. We need the country to be moving in one direction. And the maturity that the political parties have shown during the campaigning, hopefully they'll be able to show going forward. But going forward again, they've got to regulate this coalition arrangement.
Final word, Dr. Ranesh?
Yeah, it has been an excellent elections. I think on behalf of the SABC as well, I think we did really, really well, especially working at Gallagher, Midrand. We had a brilliant set of analysts as well, 17 spread all across the country. Obviously, we had an analyst in Western Cape. We had 2 in KZN, and we had 14 here. Terry also joined us as well. He says, you know what? He's part of the SABC brand, so he wanted to be with us. He wanted to be center stage with SABC radio stations.
Where else would he want to be?
Exactly, you know, he's an SABC brand. Yeah, no, so I think it has been an excellent elections. We enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope the viewers and the listeners appreciate the kind of hard work that really goes into, you know, production such as this. So you guys have been fantastic as well.
Thanks so much. It's been good, buddy.
It has been great.
And thank you so much, everybody, you know, across the country, everybody who's watched, everybody who's engaged us in any way, shape and form. We don't take that for granted, and we appreciate that you have trusted us to bring this story, you know, of the seminal moment in our South African history to you.
And I mean, you for the last 8 weeks are seeing us Beauty and the Beast. But there's so much more that's going on behind the scenes, from technical to editorial, from the heads to the EPs, to the writers, to the producers, all working hard to bring you the very best in terms of giving you context and perspective for you to make informed decisions.
But don't forget, next week,
Yeah. It's topical.
I hate to do this to you, but I tell you what, you can be topical. I will be watching it from the comfort of my bed. South Africa, thank you so much. You have decided, and of course, we have listened.
Yeah.
So until next week with Blaine on It's Topical, we say goodbye to you for now from Elections 360.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.